Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. Um, in this particular episode, I'd like to go into a little more detail about one element of asylum, which a lot of people don't really understand what it is that's being asked. Over the years, when people come into my office or when they call me from other countries for a consultation, one of the items that I go into generally is some questions to determine whether or not they might qualify for asylum. Even, if they start the conversation off by saying how bad things are and, they can't find a job and, this is happening to them and that's happening to them, I ask them, I go, well, are you being persecuted? And a lot of times I assume that the person on the other line understands what persecuted means and can give me an answer accordingly. And I've discovered over the years that I've, had to explain in more detail what persecution is and how it comes into effect in regards to an asylum claim, and how, a lot of times what might be happening to you in your foreign country is not persecution, and therefore you have no asylum case. So the initial threshold on whether or not you can claim asylum is whether or not you're being persecuted, whether there is persecution. And so, first, let's start off with a definition of persecution. So, that is generally defined as a threat to the life or freedom of, or the infliction of suffering upon those who in a way regarded as offensive. Okay, now that is a very generalized statement of what persecution is, but that basically is where it comes down to. So you have a group, whatever it happens to be, and you are different than that group for whatever it happens to be. I mean, there's all kinds of analysis that has to go into an asylum claim and to what type of persecution is occurring, but that's where it starts. Okay, so sometimes the persecution is defined in somewhat of different ways, but generally speaking, that would be the definition of what persecution is. Now, uh, just so you know, um, normally the persecution will involve significant physical force or barbaric conduct, but it doesn't have to. Okay, there are several different forms of persecution, and the reason I'm bringing this up is you might have gone to some other attorney somewhere, said nope, sorry, you don't have an immigration case. But if you look deeper into what's happening, you might find that there is a persecution based on your situation. Okay, um, there's different examples. For example, in Colombia, if you know anything about that country, you've heard about FARC, and there's been successful cases of businessmen, Colombian businessmen, who were threatened by FARC because they were afraid that they were going to get killed. Um, there's other cases where, depending, in El Salvador, youths, which is a group, were persecuted for certain reasons. There's different Indo-Fijian persons were physically harmed on several occasions and repeatedly robbed. There's cases in El Salvador, beatings by Sandinistas. So, I could go on and on. The world, unfortunately, is a cruel place in a lot of different areas. And so the United States, love it or hate it, will take cases that qualify for asylum because it's inhumane, some of the stuff that's happening, and some of it might not be inhumane, but still might be persecution. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. Uh, Keep in mind, especially, that the harm does not need to be physical in which to constitute persecution. Okay, um, for example, there have been cases where economic deprivation for, you know, asylum type grounds was recognized as persecution. Okay, but of course, it has to be more than harassment. Unfortunately, I do get several people who will give me the facts of their case, and yes, while it does show that it's harassment, it doesn't rise to the level of persecution. So probably from this conversation, you're seeing there's no absolute line. And the reality is, you might present a case to Officer A, who might say, yes, there's persecution, and theoretically present the exact same case to an officer 15 feet in another office down the aisle, who might say, no, sorry, this isn't persecution. So given that, you of course have to prepare the asylum case as best as you can, with the beginning of the asylum case indicating why and how there is persecution. Okay, now there's all different ways of social and civil manners upon which persecution can be shown. Um, Depending on the particular case, there could be various situations where there's been passport denials, constant surveillance and pressure to become an informer. There could be exclusion from institutions of higher learning. You could have been relegated to substandard dwellings. The cases go on, and it's very individualized to each case. And the reality is, what might be really persecution for one person may not be persecution for another. Now, there are different countries where, for example, women are forced into population control policies, such as in China, and where there, is a forced medical examination for those who might be fighting the, the these types of policies, that also could be persecution. You again look and see whether, for example, you know somebody might have faced a woman, for example, might have faced severe economic sanctions if she refused an abortion. Okay, that most assuredly can be persecution. You have to look at all kinds of different facts. So, as to the case. So, for example, if somebody comes into my office and they talk about the attacks and the brutality, but they have like maybe 3 scratches on them and a little bit of torn clothing. Um, that might not be persecution. Okay, but then again, it might have happened quite some time ago, and they might have recovered, and you have to see if it's on one of the enumerated grounds. And clearly the persecution must occur in the home country. Okay, in the country where you're from. You can't, for example, let's say you live in Syria and you ran to Jordan to escape the war, and then you're being persecuted in Jordan. Um, that's not going to qualify for asylum. The only way it would qualify is if you happen to be stateless. So there are people who where they were born disappears, or their citizenship is revoked by that country for whatever reason. So if they're stateless, then it's possible to show persecution in a different country. So hopefully I've elaborated a little bit on the persecution and why and how it exists. If you have questions on if you're being persecuted in a manner that would qualify for asylum, feel free to give me a call or email me. And go ahead and click like if you like the video, and subscribe to more videos coming in the future. Thank you.